Nigeria is going through a rocky period right now with instability and turmoil both in the political and economic sphere. The government cannot govern, the opposition doesn't seem to oppose, and the gap between the people and the state is growing wider. Amidst this crisis, the Coalition for Revolution will on the 5th of August 2019 embark on a revolutionary protest tagged Days of Rage across the country to demand a better Nigeria. With a sour economic situation, economic inequality, mass institutional corruption, mass unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, rising food prices, and the rising spate of insecurity, just to mention a few of the issues on the front burner, is seen to have galvanized the anger necessary for civil unrest. Having nothing to do, little to lose, and no food to eat has riled up discontent like nothing else. Is the country really rotten ripe for a revolution at this time? This and other issues we will be reflecting on as countermeasures starts right now. Comrade Sheni, revolution now. Some have said this is a legitimate democracy, despite though you may disagree with it. Are you not calling for an open anarchy at this time?
No. We are calling for the 99% of the society to have their wishes, the will of the society. So it is a democratic movement, upon which people who are the victims and who constitute the majority of the society and who actually are the receiving end of the society are saying no. It's like you are having the movement of, it's like the movement against slavery or like the movement against colonialism. Of course, there is the official, government that they say, well, we have a democracy, but the key point remains in whose interest is the entire superstructure. Whose interest does it protect? Currently, the overwhelming majority of Nigerians are victims in their country. In spite of what they produce, in spite of the enormous resources, both human and natural, they are living in poverty, they are being maimed, they are being killed, and a few are actually benefiting, in collaboration with multinational interests. So it is a legitimate, when the oppressed come out, it is a legitimate and justified movement.
Now, a lot of Nigerians will agree with you that the country is going through a rocky period right now with instability, turmoil, both in the political and economic sphere. It is quite evident that the government cannot govern. The opposition doesn't seem to oppose. And the gap between the people and the state is growing wider. Could you, give us a face to how efficient or inefficient, so to say, the political management of this country has been under the present Buhari-led government?
Well, I think this is 20 years of so-called civil rule, and this is 59 years of so-called independence. And when we look at the balance sheet in all fronts, economic, political, everywhere, what we can see is chaos. 59 years, we are back to, we are even before the British left, we are worse off right now. We have more than 11 civil wars. We are highly indebted, education is not working. We have millions, we have the largest internally displaced elements in West Africa, one of the largest in the world. And we can keep on going. We are the poorest in the world. Poverty index is terrible. And now we are having killings, we are having land grabbing, we are having wars, we are having religious and ethnic, brothers are killing brothers, sisters are killing sisters, children are victims. Over 13 million or 16 million children out of school. The educational system has collapsed. We can go on and on and on. That's the reality. So that's the reality. Only a minority And again, we need to also correct, it is not, the process is not just AAC, because the Coalition for Revolution is made up of over, so there are two major political parties in India, there's AAC, there's NCP, and we have over, 20 mass organizations here, civil society, CDHR, several organizations which, are actually part and parcel of this, each one of them having its own mass content, and the massive inflow of people into our arena within the past period also confirm the reality that people are tired across the board. The Telegram movement is massive. The Twitter movement is massive. On social media, off social media, that is online or offline, the popularization of this movement is enormous.
Let me take you up on the off social media context. Considering the turmoil that is on ground at this point in time, and the fact that there seems to be a lack of political strategy to address the issues that you have highlighted, could you tell us more about the view of Nigerians on the streets and what average Nigerians are actually thinking of right now?
Well, it's a huge, we can stay over here and talk about that, but let me just give you concrete examples as regards what is going on. Currently, in parts of Lagos right now, in practically all the parts, there are, economic wars developing, and the wars is being waged on communities. For instance, on the power question, mass movements against estimated billing has commenced months ago, which, you have a community, there's a committee of coalition of community organizations that are actually participating in it. People are fed up, because of the massive exploitation that is taking place. They have no electricity. They are paying for electricity they are not using, and they are saying that no. And on that basis, scores of people, as we speak, scores of elements are in Kirikiri, from the Orile area and, the areas where the masses are staying, based on, petitions written by the so-called discos. That's in Lagos. Outside Lagos, the same is in fact, in some communities, on electricity alone, communities that have been deprived of electricity on a massive scale for years are currently coming out, and saying that, why is that the case? So we have that. On the other side is the question of the minimum wage. We are seeing people, the trade use a government signed an agreement, for Christ's sake, how many months ago, or how many weeks ago? Today, they have reneged. The education sector workers are already going in last week, for instance. A victimization process is taking place. In Lagos Polytechnic, a worker just died in Lagos after he was arrested on the orders of the management and in collaboration with the Lagos State government, over labor issues. Currently, it passed on over the weekend. So we can go on and on.
Part of your agitation also includes the fact that you are demanding that the federal lawmakers should also be placed on minimum wage.
Yeah, they should be placed on minimum wage. Look, you cannot, to represent does not mean to usurp, does not mean that you are above. To represent effectively a people requires that you must live the life that they are living. So if you cannot live that life, you are not representing them. If you want to take a sample of water, you must take from the pool and it must represent that. But you cannot live above the society.
I mean, let's also get this. You've been part of most of the movement for change in Nigeria over the past decades. Do you believe the country is rotten ripe for a revolution at this time?
The country has always been rotten ripe. That's the reality. What has been missing has actually been the subjective force, that is the leadership that can actually provide leadership.
That takes me to my next question. What can be done to keep the revolution alive and make the changes that the protesters are agitating for now?
First and foremost is the ideology. There's a need, which the Coalition for Revolution has done, is to sum up, the key areas, which represent what the interest of the overwhelming majority, is. Because you see, leaving things vague, which we have seen, is subject to bastardization, is subject to deceit, which is what we could see with the current leadership of the country under Buhari and co. We opened, but it's necessary for the masses, which is what is being articulated now, to articulate the interests of the, and what are we calling her for? An economy for all. An economy that works for all, not for a few. We are calling for an end, and a democratic end to the insurgency, end to the killings. Of course, we know that the service chiefs, the entire security architecture is worthless and has compromised. They are part of the puzzle. It's the conflict, the insurgencies, and the various conflicts that are there are a reflection of a business. Some people are making billions from this. Just today, it's been reported in pages of newspapers that over 1,000 soldiers were buried secretly. This is a crime against humanity. This is a crime. So we know that we have no trust in both the leadership, in both the security infrastructure, in both the architecture that they claim exists. There's a need for everybody to get involved in the security affairs. The questions of the campuses comes to third. Fees have to go. Fees have to fall. Scores of our children want to add value to their lives. You use artificial barriers to deprive them and make education a minority affair. The question of a living wage is important, and the question of political prisoners. There's no basis why anybody should be in gallows. Whether you are Zazaki, whether you are whatever, there's no basis. There's a rule of law established. If you committed the crime, it should be arrested. But who committed the crime now? Scores of Nigerians have been killed for what they believe. I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Muslim, I don't follow any, but every Nigerian has a right to their belief. And nobody has a right to deprive anybody of his right. Religion is a private affair of every individual. They are free to have their beliefs and practice their belief. But it is a crime for you to start assaulting or killing people on the basis of their beliefs or and so the incident that created the conditions in the first instance, is a crime against humanity. So when we put all these things together, we can no longer afford to keep quiet in this country. Neither are we going to allow this country to be pushed into the arenas of barbarism. We will not watch while we see brothers kill brothers on the basis of religion or on the basis of ethnicity, which this regime and this system promotes for the selfish interest of the politicians. Those are the key things that we actually, we want the unity of the country, we want an integrated country, we want a country where religion of everybody is a private affair that has everyone with everybody having a right to their own beliefs. Sanity needs to be asserted.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Nigeria is going through a rocky period at this time, and there's been call for revolution. With us in the studio to analyze the current political situation in the country is Comrade Benga Komolafe. It's a pleasure having you on SaharaTv again, sir.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you very much.
Like we said earlier, sir, the country is going through rocky periods at this point in time. Instability, turmoil, both in the political and the economic sphere. The government seems not to be able to govern, and the opposition doesn't seem to oppose, and the gap between the people and the state is getting wider. Let's first of all get your perspective on the efficiency or inefficiency of the present Buhari-led government to manage the current crisis. What's your view on this, sir?
Yeah, well, I think the President Muhammadu Buhari government has demonstrated basic incapacity to manage the conflicting interests in the Nigerian state. We have to also admit that the administration came in at a very turbulent period in Nigerian history. They inherited a lot of problems from the Jonathan administration. And But actually, that was also precisely the reason why the President Muhammadu Buhari government was voted in, because people had expectations that some of those specific problems that plagued the country under the previous administration will be addressed, particularly the crisis of governance. Under President Jonathan, it was such that corruption had become a defining feature of that government, as almost on a daily basis, reports of high-level haste, financial haste, involving top government functionaries of that government was always in the news, were always inundated with reports of so much billion of dollars missing and all of that. And all of that was happening against the backdrop of infrastructure that had collapsed, and that both the previous Obasanjo government and the Jonathan government seemed helpless in addressing. Take an example of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, which about 130-kilometer road, which the military built in a few years after the Civil War. And we suddenly discovered that that road could not be repaired, in the space of almost 20 years now. And that's just a metaphor for the general collapse of physical infrastructures, be it electricity, roads. Nobody even talks about potable water anymore in Nigeria. Nobody even talks about sanitation facilities, and so on and so forth. People have to provide electricity for themselves, and so on and so forth. So the expectation, and given the much vaunted anti-corruption pedigree of the person of President Muhammadu Buhari, the expectation was that it would come in to stem the tide, the downward slide in the country, curb corruption, and by dint of personal example, demonstrate utmost integrity and put some order and common sense into the management of public resources. But unfortunately, the government came in, and though we were made to wait for so long for the announcement of ministers, eventually the announcement came, and it was such a huge letdown, because a lot of the people that were appointed then were people that were, some of them were heavily smeared by the same corruption allegation. And the second coming seems to be even worse, because some of the politicians that have been in the news for high-level graft have also been reappointed by President Muhammadu Buhari. We also have to talk about the security situation. The fact that the insurgency in the northeast seem not to be letting down, and why new insurgent groups seem to be emerging. People talk about the herdsmen that have made life insecure virtually all over the country. People also talk about some faceless bandits that have literally overrun a lot of states in the northwest part of the country. And all of these also can be linked to increasing food scarcity, because a lot of farming communities have been displaced by the activities of this banditry. And the government seems to be helpless in curbing these violent insurgencies. In the social scene, we all know education remains what it is, completely comatose. In states, in heavily populated states like Lagos, we still have a situation where people have to cope with 130, 120 children per class. The teachers are overstressed. The facilities for effective learning are not there. The level of administration at the higher colleges and institutions is nothing to write home about. We are familiar with the incessant stories of strikes and by university and college teachers all over the country. So this has been the reality, and it will not be an exaggeration to describe the situation as very explosive. And of course, a lot of people talk about this in the privacy of their homes, in formal and informal meetings, openly and otherwise.
From extensively, we will say that the country at this point is rotten ripe for a revolution?
Well, my candid opinion is that it's overripe. We'll be talking of endemic social crisis for quite a long while. It's because of the crisis of legitimacy of the Nigerian state that we had the military coup of 1983 that brought in President Buhari as a military head of state at that time. And interestingly, part of the mantra then in 1983 was that they were going to stop corruption. Then we all know the story. Then the Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida military junta kicked those ones out. They came in, and corruption now became the culture, way of life of the people, and why all the levers of development in the country actually nosedive under the Babangida administration. Then the civilians came in, but interestingly, the military managed to actually hand over to civilian clones of themselves. And so we discovered that active functionaries under the military are also the ones that have amassed sufficient wealth to dominate the political space, such that genuine patriotic forces who try to also intervene in the political arena are easily frustrated out. Because over time, since 1999, the political situation is such that it's become heavily monetized. Even positions as simple and rudimentary as councillors. To contest for such positions, you have to have heavy amounts of money, which most honest people cannot afford. And so this political space is left open only for those who have access or who have had access to the looting of state resources, which enables them to buy their way through the political process into power. And so you have a leadership recruitment process that is endemically corrupt and that is fundamentally rigged against the interests of the majority of the suffering masses of Nigeria.
That's right. There seems to be apparent lack of information and lack of transparency from this government, and when it comes to decision making by this government. Let's hear your perspective on what kind of revolution that this country deserves at this time, because some are of the opinion, or they feel, that Nigeria is half primed for a violent revolution at this time. So what kind of revolution are we talking about?
Well, I do not really subscribe that a revolutionary process needs to be violent, because we've also had a lot of violent revolutionary upheavals in several other countries within and outside the African context that are not ended very well. So you come back to wonder what was the whole bloodshed and upheaval about at the end of the day. The contemporary experience has shown that it's also possible to have a relatively peaceful revolutionary transition. Though the aims and objective of the Arab Spring was largely aborted, but the fact remains that the issues the Arab Spring raised remains pertinent and still determines the political reality in the Middle East up to today. We have the situation in Sudan, and right now we also have a revolutionary situation in Hong Kong and Puerto Rico, where a government has actually been forced to resign. So it is possible to get our people organized and to come out in massive numbers to express their rejection of a present system that has become fundamentally rigged against the interest of the majority to the benefit of very few people. You can almost count on your fingertips.
Buhari is the face of this regime, but beneath him, there is an extensive system of corruption and organized establishment of criminals. Do you think that all of this will disappear just because Buhari had to go, for example?
Yeah, it cannot be about Buhari. It has to be about a system that has rendered poor President Buhari ineffective. It is generally acknowledged that the person of, though a lot of people also will contend that with that statement, that the person of General Buhari is generally honest and has the basic confidence. I mean, inspired the kind of confidence that always makes some people to clutter around me as a figure that could instill some level of order and common sense into governance. Even when he was a soldier, we had the same scenario. He was brought in to lead a military push that had top on his agenda the issue of addressing corruption and so on. How it fared then also is also subject to a lot of debates, but we can say that the perception of the person of Buhari as a generally honest person persisted to the extent that people still congregated around him to still want to exploit that popular image to get back to power under the present dispensation. So it cannot be about the personal dispensation or orientation of one person. It certainly has to do with a system that is fundamentally entrenched in a very systemic way in corrupt and anti-people way of doing things and managing resources that belongs to everybody.
So in what ways
So it will appear that despite the relative honesty of the person of Buhari, the system has managed to completely rubbish that pedigree.
So in what ways now can Nigeria manage a peaceful and inclusive revolutionary transition now?
There must be a movement, a mass movement, a mass organized movement that is organically linked to all the levers of the social and cultural life of our people must evolve to aggregate popular interest and aspirations for development. That means such a movement must also be programmatic, must have a visionary program that apprehend our history of underdevelopment and continuous abortion of our developmental aspirations since independence, and come out with statements that realistically addresses those issues and problems, with also a coherent program of what to do about specific situations and sectors that have been badly battered by the continuous mismanagement and misrule that we have been subjected to. We expect a government that will address the issue of redeveloping the destroyed productive base. It is important to emphasize that. The productive base of the economy, a program that will get our people back to work, a program that will reindustrialize. What we had under Babangida with his policies of structural adjustment was that it was a comprehensive program of deindustrialization. Under that program, hundreds of enterprises have been closed down. And unfortunately, under the Obasanjo government, that program was continued. And not just the public sector was not affected, even the private sector was also battered because of the over-liberalization of the economy and the influx of all manner of junk from every part of the world. We literally became the junkyard of the whole world. So local industry simply collapsed. The textile sector is always a popular reference, where the population of workers declined from over 500,000 at its peak in the 80s to less than 20,000 now, with over 300 factories closed down. So we must get our industry revitalized. We must build our productive base. We must get our people back to work. We must get young people back to work. All this silly talk of entrepreneurial training, and everybody is training how to do interior decoration, how to do fashion designing, and makeup artists and all this nonsense, does not address the challenge of getting our economy to become productive. By the 80s, our productive base was about 14%. The manufacturing sector contributed about 14% to the GDP. Now it's over between 3 and 4%. In a country that graduates almost 500,000 young people from colleges every year. That cannot continue. It's a perfect recipe for absolute disaster. As a matter of fact, if we don't have a peaceful mass movement that will lead the revolutionary process of change, we are all sitting on kegs of gunpowder, because we have an explosive situation of young people who are not even used to a modern industrial culture of work, because there are no industries to socialize them to the 21st century values of going to work, having the experience and the discipline of the modern workspace. We have a whole generation of young people who have never had that experience. All this talk about vocational training and all really cannot address that situation. The development paradigm that has violently desecrated the Constitution of Nigeria, which provides for government to control and manage the commanding heights of the Nigerian economy. A constitutional provision which informed the early vision of the Nigerian founding fathers, which had development pathway, developmental plans. We used to have development plans that spanned periods of 10 years. We had development plans that provided that government must invest in building an upstream sector, which is the base for industrialization in any country of our size particularly. That's why they talk about Jakarta, Alaja steel rolling mill, the inland steel rolling mills in Osogbo, Katsina, Jos. The vision was to input the ingots, the iron rods and all of that from the Ajaokuta to all these inland rolling mills that will now go into the machine tools companies that produce the basic spare parts and machinery which your Cadbury or Lever Brothers would now use. Because those kind of industries are actually useless. You have a Cadbury that even imports cocoa concentrates. You export raw cocoa, you bring in cocoa concentrate. You have to import machinery, you have to import spare parts, So these are just assembly plants. We are really not doing anything here. And even those ones, most of them have been frustrated out of the Nigerian industrial scene because of the horrible policies we had under Obasanjo. We must rethink our developmental paradigms. We must go back to the era of conscious developmental planning and visioning so that we can get our people back to work.
Let me get this, because it will be remiss if I do not ask you this question during the course of this interview. A one-time Labour leader and now turned politician, the national chairman of the All Progressive Congress, Comrade Adams Oshiomhole, has called on organized labor to challenge political leaders to ensure that state resources meet the needs of workers and other Nigerians. In his statements, let me quote him, just to tell you that from inside, I am much more convinced that unions should not only exist, but should have the capacity and ruthlessly deploy that capacity to ensure that the resources of states are dissipated in favor of working people and working families. This was the statement of the former NLC president.
Yeah.
Doesn't it sound ironical?
Oh, well.
What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I agree absolutely with that statement that trade unions and other organizations of the working people must be alive to their responsibility of checkmating the downward slide that we are all experiencing in all sectors.
So what
I
has
agree.
happened? What has happened to the
But I agree. I
union?
also agree.
Isn't that an indictment on the labor movement itself?
Well, it's an indictment on Mr. Oshiomhole himself, who was not only a labor leader, but who was a very influential voice in the labor movement, and perhaps he still is, and who also have the privilege of playing prominent role in our contemporary political experience, that he has not really practicalized what he has verbalized there, So I agree with you that there's a lot of irony there, So it will seem that our ruling class, possibly because of their greed, or maybe just the system that makes it impossible for them, are incapable of actually doing the right things when they know the right things. Yes, the labor movement has a lot of role to play, and that cannot be overemphasized. But I've always also pointed out to people who seem to have too much expectation of what the role of labor, organized labor, should be. Organized labor could be a powerful voice, especially in terms of enunciating economic policies that could overall advance the interest of workers and not working people, which they are not doing right now. But the point also remains that really I've not seen anywhere in the world where trade unions lead revolution. I've not seen it done anywhere. They could be of enormous influence in the political process. It could also be a veritable recruitment ground of tested individuals and visionaries, into the political space, But unfortunately, that's not happening here. And it's also one of the paradoxes of development, and we have to address.
Let me ask this question finally. What can be done to keep the revolution alive and make the changes that the protesters and movements like the Coalition for Revolutionary and other movements are actually agitating for, especially towards the August 5 Days of Rage revolution?
Yeah, I think I'll be very emphatic about this. The August 5 initiative is welcome. A lot of quarters have expressed reservations. But to the extent that most honest Nigerians, most working people in Nigeria who are the receiving end of the present rot, agree that things are simply not working, agree that we simply cannot continue like this. To that extent, I think we should welcome any initiative from any quarter whatsoever to challenge what's going on right now and put forward an alternative program of development in accordance with the Nigerian Constitution, particularly Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution, which made abundant provisions for the kind of economic and social relations that should obtain in our country. But unfortunately, that constitution has been violently desecrated because our ruling class, particularly in 1999, have consciously subverted the provisions of the Constitution, that the economy, the commanding heights of the economy should be controlled by the government, that the business of government should be primarily geared towards the welfare and well-being of all Nigerians. And as we have in section 16(2)(d) particularly, that the need of Nigerians for adequate food, I'm almost quoting it, shelter, housing, education, healthcare, must be provided by the Nigerian state. All of these have been abandoned. All of these have been ignored by an alternative vision that seeks to put the economy and the productive levels of the economy in the hands and pockets of very few people. Today we have a situation where the inequality coefficient has become one of the highest in the whole world, which could never have even been dreamt of, in the bad 1980s. We now have a situation where you have 5 people controlling the world that the entire budget of 200 million Nigerians cannot even meet up with. One individual is supposedly $25 billion rich. What's our budget? So we have had a process of over-concentration, of wealth in the hands of very few people. We have our productive forces destroyed over time, completely rendering our people useless and jobless. That must be reversed, because if we don't reverse it, honestly, Boko Haram is going to be a child's play.
Thank you very much, Comrade Benga.
Thank you.